Hi guys, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today's video is my November TBR. My second to last TBR of the year, which is honestly mind-boggling in every single way. And I also won't lie, my TBR this month is rather ambitious because I'm starting to feel the pressure of the end of the year. There's so many books I want to get to, both new releases and books that have been on my shelf for a while that are just calling out to me. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right in. Before I dive into the books themselves, first a word from this video sponsor, which is Macmillan. So excited to be partnering up with Macmillan to show off a very exciting nonfiction release that just hit the shelves in America. That is Women of Rothschild by Natalie Livingston. This is already out in the UK and has gotten so much praise, so I'm thrilled that it's being published in the United States, and I was able to get a copy in my hands, and it is available in stores now. But this is a nonfiction work centering on one of the most famous families in the world, the Rothschilds. But in this particular piece of nonfiction, our author is actually diving into a more unknown area of this family, and specifically is looking to give voice to the women of this family and how their legacy and history was significant to the shaping of this very, very famous and powerful family. The scope of this work is following the women of the Rothschilds family from the dawn of the 19th century to the early years of the 21st, as Jews in Christian society, as well as women in an incredibly patriarchal family, kept outside of not only family affairs, but the family business of the bank itself. These women were forced to forge their own destiny and distinct dynasty of daughters throughout time. The women of this family are incredibly diverse and unique, from idealists to liberals to conservatives, and some of them were talented hostesses to diplomats, powerful friends on all shores, including the queen herself. This is said to be absorbing and compulsive and gives voices to the complicated and privileged women of the Rothschilds family and how their tenacity ultimately shaped history. This book just sounds really interesting to me. Obviously, as a history major, I'm a huge fan of any type of nonfiction, especially ones that provide new insight and perspective on very famous individuals. In this instance, we're obviously looking at a family. This time period in history is a really fascinating one, as there's a lot of change, also corruption and greed all kind of happening at the same time. Functionally, this book is also beautifully put together. The pages are such high quality, and there's also illustrations throughout it that are really, really breathtaking. I'm curious about this one. I feel like the Rothschilds are just simply like one of the most notorious families, but to be honest, outside of like the highlights, I don't know much about them. So I'm really excited to kind of dive into more of their family history and learn more about the women of this family, which are obviously not often talked about or centered in history in general. Again, this is a release that got such high praise already in the UK, but it's just now come out in the United States. It is available in stores now and online, and I will leave a link in my description if you're interested in learning more. But again, big shout out to Macmillan for sponsoring this video and also sending me this new release as well. Alrighty, so my November TBR is honestly a little ridiculous, but there's just so many new releases and series I want to get to before the end of the year. I also have quite the range of like what I'm actually craving to read. Like I want stuff that's vibey, I want stuff with lots of action. Regardless, let's go ahead and chat about the books I want to read, starting with Bloodmarked by Tracy Deonn. This is one of my most anticipated releases of the year. I've been counting down the days until this was coming out since I finished the first one just about 2 years ago. I plan to vlog this reading experience. I truly cannot wait. But if you're not familiar, this is book 2, the first one being Legendborn, just one of the best YA fantasy series that have come out in so long. This is just absolutely captivating. And in the first one, we're introduced to our main character, Bree, who is just accepted and enrolled into a prestigious high school program on the UNC campus. She decided to move forward with leaving home after the tragic and unexpected passing of her mother, kind of looking to run away from her grief as well as her father's grief. Looking for a fresh start, but unfortunately, everything is kind of turned upside down when Bree witnesses a magical attack her first day on campus. This attack sort of introduces Bree to the existence of not only magic and like dark creatures, but also of a secret society that exists on campus that's fueled by Arthurian legend, given the responsibility to defeat these dark creatures and like defend humanity. After realizing that magic exists, Bree begins to question the circumstances around her mother's death and becomes determined to join the secret society in hopes of uncovering more information. This book is so intense. First and foremost, Bree as a main character is amazing. She's so easy to root for. This book is full of magic and destiny and family legacy. It was extraordinary. I loved book 1. I can't wait to read book 2. I feel like it's going to be just as explosive and incredible as the first installment. Speaking of fantasy sequels I need to get to, the next book on my list is Locket by Robert Jackson Bennett. This book came out, I want to say, at the end of September, early October, and I am so disappointed that I have not gotten to this book yet. This is the third and final installment in a trilogy that's one of my all-time favorites. I love the Foundry Side series. It's so unique, full of so many great characters, humor, and adventure. It has honestly all the things that I love. But if you're not familiar, this is a fantasy trilogy that follows our main character Sansia, and she lives in a place called Foundry Side. In this fantasy world, there are very powerful merchant houses, and they actually have compounds that basically control about 80% of the land in her city. The rest of the land is called the Foundry Side and is essentially lawless. Also in this world, there is a type of magic that I kind of call like magical coding. Basically, if you understand the language of a material, you can break in and rewrite it to make it interact with the world differently. In the beginning of book 1, we follow our main character Sansia, who is very good at this magic, and she's also a very good thief. Of course, at the beginning of the story, she's hired to steal a very powerful ancient artifact. She succeeds because she's very good at her job, but this inevitably kind of causes a conflict between all of the merchant houses, and our main character kind of finds herself at the heart of it. This book is all about the underdog. It's all about a group of misfits coming together to basically destroy really powerful organizations. Great magic, great escalation of plot. I need to see how it's going to end. I love Robert Jackson Bennett's writing. He has so many fantasy works that are my favorite. I need to get to this. Next up, I have two sort of weirder fantasy books that have been calling out to me. I love a strange fantasy tale, and I feel like both of these books are going to fit the bill perfectly. The first is The Hand of the Sun King by J.T. Greathouse. This was recommended to me over a year ago as a book that could possibly be a new all-time fave, so the fact I haven't gotten to it yet, I'm disappointed in. But I really think this could be a story I love so much, truly based on like the tropes and the synopsis and kind of the elements of this book. And this follows our main character Wen, and Wen was born in two worlds. The first is the world of his father, who has a legacy of proud loyalty to a certain set of very powerful gods, and his father kind of expects him to follow in his footsteps, take a certain set of examinations, and begin to serve the empire that his father resides in. On the flip side though, Wen's mother is a legacy of rebellion, wild gods and magic that the imperial sorcerers have yet to figure out how to control. And now at the beginning of this book, Wen is kind of at the decision point, deciding which steps he wants to take in which direction and which world he wants to become a part of, especially as the tension between the empire and the resistance begins to heat up more and more. This seems to be a story about legacy and magic, again, things I love so much, and also seems to center gods, and I love any type of human-god interaction. I've heard such great things about this. I really feel like I'm going to love it, and I think the sequel is like coming out or has already just come out, so clearly I need to get to this soon. Next weird fantasy book that's on my list is 16 Ways to Defend a Walled City by KJ Parker. Something about the title, something about the synopsis of this story really calls out to me. It seems strange. It seems a little bizarre, specifically because it kind of feels like a story that takes place in one time and place and like a very intense and isolated situation. The story follows our main character Orhan and his history of the Great Siege. This, I believe, is like written reflectively and kind of marks a significant moment in time that he was very much involved in. And Orhan himself is an engineer. And at the beginning of this book, the city that he lives in is besieged by the enemy. They were completely caught by surprise. They have no food, they have no supplies. They're basically like praying to the gods that some miracle will happen. So enter Orhan, who is not a military man, in fact, is not very good at taking orders at all. But he begins to like devise a way to basically save the city, to destroy the enemy. I am so curious about this. I love when books are told in like a reflective way. I think it's such an interesting way to absorb a story. Again, I'm also really fascinated by the fact that this is like one event and this is a trilogy. So I think there's like other historical moments we also follow in this like fantastical place, wherever it may be. I don't know. I feel like this could be a book that's right up my alley, and I'm very curious to see how I feel about it. Next up, I have a couple new releases that just came out last month that I need to read as soon as possible. The first is Our Missing Hearts by Celeste Ng. It's no secret that Celeste Ng is one of my all-time favorite authors. I've read both of her previous works, and both of them are some of my all-time favorites. This book really calls out to me, and I actually have incredibly high expectations and feel like this could be my new favorite from this author. And I feel this way because it has obviously literary fiction elements. It's a Celeste Ng story, but it also seems to have some sort of like dystopian, futuristic elements as well woven in, which I think sounds so cool. This follows our main character, Bird Gardner, and he lives a quiet existence living alongside his father in the library that he works in. Bird knows to keep his head down, to not draw any attention to himself or anyone around him, as well as to not ask too many questions or stray too far from home. For a decade, Bird, his father, and the American people's lives have been governed by a new set of laws that were passed, resulting from a very extremist response during economic instability. These laws were passed to preserve American culture and basically allows the government to not only screen any type of things that are produced, but also rehome children of deemed dissidents, and specifically the most targeted children are those of Asian origin. Libraries have also been forced to remove any book deemed unpatriotic, including the works of Bird's mother, who is a poet, who also left the family when he was 9 years old. Bird has a very complicated relationship with how he views his mother and knows that he must not interact with her work in any way, shape, or form. But when he receives a very cryptic and mysterious letter, he sort of begins a quest in trying to find her. This book just sounds amazing. It says it's an old story made new, the way supposedly civilized communities can ignore the most searing injustice. It's a story about the power and the limitations of art to create change, and the lessons and legacies we pass on to our children. I am so excited to pick this book up. I hope it's a new favorite before the end of the year, but there's obviously only one way to find out. The next new release that's just at the top of my TBR pile should be no surprise, and that is Thistlefoot by Jenna Rose Nethercolt. Everything about this book screams something I would love. It's weird, it's folklore based, and it just seems to have a lot of whimsy and darkness as well. And this is a story that follows the Yaga siblings, two young men who have kind of had a falling out. The first is Valentine, who is a very serious and hardworking woodworker, and the other is Isaac, who is essentially a pickpocket. Years and miles of American highway have seen these two separated for a long time. They have not spoken or seen each other in years. But once they receive word that they are receiving an inheritance, they meet up once again, and instead of the inheritance being like land or money you generally expect, they realize that they are inheriting a sentient house on chicken legs, which has arrived on the shores of America from Eastern Europe. Now these two young men begin traveling on this very strange house across the American landscape, because also with its arrival, like a dark evil power has also come to the shores of America as well. This just sounds like everything I could possibly want or love. I feel like it's going to be full of like reconnecting relationships between these two brothers, beautiful and strange writing, folklore, and like family history and legacy. I can't wait. Sounds like it's going to be a visual experience that I will adore, so this is for sure a must read this month. Next is a book I carried over actually from my October TBR that I was not able to get to, and that is The Kingdoms by Natasha Pulley. This is sort of a strange alternate history thriller novel that I feel like will also be a super quick read. I love alternate history. This is said to be in the same vein as the 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle or David Mitchell books in terms of alternate history vibes, which I personally love so much. Reading over the synopsis, you quickly gather that this book is going to be mysterious right out the gate. And in this story, we're introduced to our main character, Joe, who has a bad case of amnesia. At the beginning of the story, he's stepping off a train in the French colony of Great Britain. He has no memory of who he is, where he's come from, and why he's currently where he is now. The only clue about his past is a postcard that he finds in his pocket, written in the illegal language of English and signed with the letter M. And from there, we follow Joe as he tries to solve this mystery and apparently change history along the way. Honestly, this just sounds weird and quite the page turner. I'm hoping for a very interesting ride from beginning to end, so I'm really excited about this book. Next up, I have a few books that I'm hoping will make me cry. The first is The Stationery Shop by Marjan Kamali. Honestly, I almost teared up just reading the synopsis. This just seems like a great and heartbreaking love story about two people and fate kind of tearing them apart and bringing them back together once again. I feel like it's going to be a beautiful journey from beginning to end. This book opens in 1953 in Tehran, and one of the main characters we follow is Roiha, and she loves visiting a very specific bookshop that she feels like is a literary oasis. There, the owner of the bookshop decides to introduce Roiha to one of his other favorite customers, Bahman, and these two quickly fall in love, their romance blooms, and and fast forward to the eve of their marriage, Bachman asks Roya to meet him in the square, but when she's on the way there, violence erupts, and quickly she actually has to flee the country, and she doesn't know what happened to Bachman at all. Fast forward, these two people begin to live their own lives separately from one another, but a chance encounter brings them back into each other's lives, I think much later in life. Again, this is a story about love and fate and love through time, and I think it's going to destroy me, but truly there is only one way to find out. Next book that's on my list is The Gollum and the Genie by Helene Wecker. This is a book I have been wanting to read for years, and it finally feels like the right time. This, I hear, is actually a very charming story about two unlikely people existing and living together. It's a story set in 1899 and in New York City. We follow two very unlikely main characters. The first is Gollum, who was traveling to the New World with her creator, but unfortunately though, they actually passed away at sea. She finds herself unmoored and adrift when the ship finally arrives in the New York harbor. The other main character we follow is Ahmad, who is a genie who's been trapped inside of a lamp for centuries, but after accidentally being released by someone in lower Manhattan, now trying to figure out his new existence and his life in this very strange place. These two characters sort of come together. I think they live in the same neighborhood and they're trying to like meet new people and like get to know their neighbors. I hear this book is really, really charming and also beautifully written. Honestly, just all of the things I love so much. I also feel like it's a perfect sort of fall, winter read. Very, very vibey, very atmospheric, and I cannot wait. The next book on my list is Bloodbound by Patricia Briggs. This is the second book to the Mercy Thompson series, which I started in October. In October, I had a bit of a week where I read all the urban fantasy that I could get my hands on, specifically urban fantasy with like a strong romantic element. And in doing that, I actually checked out the Mercy Thompson series, which is super popular, and I really liked book one, which is called Moon Called. So I wanted to add the sequel on my list for the month of November because I honestly flew through the first one. I read it in like one day. But in this series, we follow our main character, Mercy, and she is a mechanic, and she lives in kind of a small town in Washington State. And here she lives amongst lots of different supernatural creatures. Her neighbor is a werewolf. She herself is a shifter who can turn into a coyote. There are vampires and fae, again, lots of supernatural creatures. In book one, there was a bit of a disturbance, kind of an unlikely villain sort of arrives in Mercy's town, and she and a bunch of other characters kind of have to join forces to try to save the day. But in doing this, it kind of unlocks a larger mystery and a larger power at play, which I'm sure will be kind of unfolding across the rest of this series, which is very long, 13 books. I love urban fantasy, and I feel like this is a great series. Not only is there a compelling main character, there is, from what I can tell, going to be a very slow burn romance, which I always love, and just like the magic and all of the camaraderie elements are just really entertaining, and because there's so many books, the pacing for me always feels super satisfying. So anyway, I just want to continue on with this journey and check out book two. And the last book that is on my TBR for the month is Tybola Burn by James S.A. Corey. This is book 4 to the Expanse series. I have really been enjoying this series, and I also feel like every book gets better and better, with the third one being my favorite, which I read earlier this year. I just feel like James S.A. Corey does such a great job creating such fascinating, like, space plots that have so many different layers of politics. So many new characters are introduced to us. Each book kind of follows a new set of main characters, which I think works so well. We're kind of experiencing conflicts too from so many different angles and like professions, which I think is great. I really enjoyed the third one quite a bit, as I already mentioned, so I'm curious to see how this world is going to continue to expand. Basically, this is a space opera series set in kind of the near future. Humanity has expanded beyond the boundaries of Earth, and now there's actually governments both on the moon, Mars, and also in an area called the Belt, which is a collection of space stations. All of these governments are now very much their own entity, and there's actually a lot of tension between everyone. And when ancient alien technology and other things begin to occur in books 1 through 3, you really see how that tension really ebbs and flows, creating very fascinating and scary situations. For the most part, each book does introduce like a new set of main characters each time, though we do have consistent main characters with our ship captain Jim Holden and his crew, which does provide some consistency. It's fun. It's fast-paced. Definitely like the best plot-forward series I've read in a long time. I fly through them, so I wanted to add this as well. Alrighty guys, that is my super ambitious November TBR. Please let me know down below some books you hope to get to this month, as I would love to know. Again, big shout out to this video's sponsor, which is Macmillan. Again, I'll have info on the book I featured in the description. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you soon with another one soon. Goodbye!